Hi everyone and welcome to another marvelous video. 2016's X-Men Apocalypse certainly gave us an overwhelming introduction to En-Sabah Nur's character and his Four Horsemen. Chosen by Apocalypse himself, the Four Horsemen's strengths were amplified to such an extreme level that each of them could be a challenge for the entire X-Men. Needless to mention that Magneto could end the world all by himself. In the Marvel Universe, Apocalypse appeared in different periods of time and wreaked havoc on the world. He believed in survival of the fittest and wanted only mutants to survive on the planet, subduing the humans. During each of his appearances, he was accompanied by his Four Horsemen, whom he chose and augmented their powers. In today's video, we will be exploring every terrifying horseman of the Apocalypse throughout time. So, without any further delay, let's begin. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us, it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin. The first incarnation of Horsemen. The first incarnation of the Four Horsemen were the children of En-Sabah Nur and his wife Genesis. At the time of their birth, their maternal aunt Iska forged a sword in 4 parts known as the Scarab. The 4 children were named Pestilence, War, Famine and Death. They were introduced in Marvel issue 1000, published in August 2019. They all inhabited the ancient mutant land of Okkara. At some point, Amenthi demons led by Annihilation attacked and began invading their land. The mutants of Okkara were led by Genesis and included the Four Horsemen as well as her sister Iska in the battle against the invading forces. Using the Twilight Sword, the enemies tore Okkara into 2 parts. The Okkaran mutants sealed themselves off into Amenth to halt their invasion of Earth and buy some time for Apocalypse to build a line of new powerful mutants to combat the demons when they would arrive next. This included Genesis, Iska and the Four Horsemen. The part sealed in Amenth, known as Arakko, was the home of Genesis and mutants who built towers to protect themselves from the demons. Meanwhile, on Earth, Apocalypse built a pyramid in 4 parts, known as the Temple of Horsemen, to show respect for their sacrifice, and later went on to find his new horsemen. It housed 4 memorable tombs in which he hid the 4 parts of the Scarab. On Arakko, Genesis and the mutants fought against the demons for over millennia. The battles of Genesis and the horsemen remained as the legends of Arakko, and the victories were celebrated. Later, Annihilation invited Genesis via her sister Iska to settle on a truce. Genesis accepted the offer and arrived at the Hall of Annihilation only to realize that all this while the demons had been breeding with the mutants to create a stronger breed of warrior for Amenth. Annihilation offered Genesis to join hands, but she denied it and a vicious fight began between the 2 of them. Genesis emerged victorious in defeating the Dark God, removing the golden helm of Annihilation from its host. However, this eventually worsened the situation of the mutants as the demons, without their leader, spread their rampage across Arakko. They destroyed the temples and several other mutants. The Horsemen and the mutants believed Genesis to be dead and sent Summoner, the son of War and Bracken, with a portion of Arakko to find Apocalypse and seek assistance. Genesis was not dead, and with the hope of gaining command over the horde of demons, she donned the golden helm of Annihilation. Genesis then began commanding the forces of Amenth, and so did her 4 children, or the Four Horsemen. They began leading the forces of Amenth, and while conducting their conquest of Dryador, Summoner arrived with Apocalypse and a few Krakoan mutants. The Four Horsemen viciously attacked their father and almost killed him before Opal Luna Saturnine, the Omniversal Majestrix and the ruler of the Otherworld, interrupted the fight and convinced War to settle over a tournament. War and Death took part in the tournament, while Pestilence and Famine chose to act as the regents of the fiefdom of Amenth. After the Krakoans won the tournament, Annihilation denied their terms and attacked them. After a long and vicious fight, Annihilation was defeated and his golden helm was removed from Genesis. Annihilation tried taking over Apocalypse, but the latter managed to control it. As Annihilation, he gained full control of the Amenthi forces and surrendered the tournament on their behalf. Following this, Apocalypse and his family reunited, except for Death, who chose to serve Sevaleth, Horseman of Apocalypse from the 11th century. During the time when his children were sealed off in Araco, Apocalypse reunited several different superpowered beings for the title of Pestilence, War, Death, and Famine. In the 11th century, Rama-Tut began manipulating Apocalypse and goading him into believing that certain beings would be causing him trouble in the future. As showcased in 2012's Uncanny Avengers issue number 6, Apocalypse makes a surprise visit to Thor in Scandinavia and delivers a catastrophic blow from behind. Thor was then using the Jarnbjorn, and when he tried cutting through Apocalypse's armor, he failed. The battle was soon over after Thor received yet another devastating blow. However, he chose to escape on time and survived. He returned to Asgard and sought the help of Odin, who denied it, stating that they were not to harm any celestial. As Thor left the room, Loki offered his help to create a weapon capable of piercing through Apocalypse's impenetrable armor, which was by blessing the Jarnbjorn with Thor's blood. However, this was a part of Kang's plan, and it was him who advised Thor in the form of Loki. Meanwhile, Rama-Tut informed Apocalypse of a man named Folkburn Logan, who was an ancestor of Wolverine and could be the reason for his demise in the future. The scene shifts to London, where Folkburn gets into an argument with his friend for calling him pagan. Suddenly, a burst of bright light struck his friend and burned him into ashes. It was the Horseman of Apocalypse. It consisted of phantom bats of the 12 Minds as Pestilence and 3 other unknown mutants for Death, War, and Famine. Unfortunately for them, Thor had also arrived and was then fueling with rage for his last defeat. Using his weapon, Jarnbjorn, he single-handedly killed each and every horseman in moments. Rama-Tut's involvement was soon revealed to Apocalypse, but it was too late. Thor viciously attacked Apocalypse, and this time he emerged victorious and delivered a lethal cut across his shoulders, piercing his celestial armor with his Jarnbjorn imbued with his blood. Horseman of Apocalypse in Romania. Next, in the 15th century, Apocalypse appeared with his 4 horsemen. It was showcased in the 4-part mini-series titled X-Men Apocalypse vs. Dracula, published in 2006. Although the issue was about Dracula's revenge on Apocalypse and his clan, Akaba, it showcased Apocalypse and his horsemen in flashbacks. Issue 1 begins with Vlad Tepes, aka Vlad the Impaler, aka Dracula, leading his men in battle against invaders in Romania in 1459. They managed to emerge victorious, but it was short-lived as a new, far more deadly force arrived. It was the Dark Riders. The Dark Riders, or Riders of the Storm, were the followers of Apocalypse and could be summoned by him by unknown means. By the 15th century, they were the most feared groups, and owing to their magnitude of power, they were considered to be a myth. Even Vlad did not believe they existed until they appeared before him. However, Vlad, after his victory, was arrogant enough to think he could take them down, and so while his army fled, he remained to face the Dark Riders. The Dark Riders included the Horsemen of Apocalypse, of which we would only notice War, a huge warrior with 2 massive battle axes that could be joined via its rear end. Vlad prepared to strike the first blow, but was easily subdued by War, following which Apocalypse crushed him and went on his crusade with his troops. Dracula survived and later planned his vengeance against the Apocalypse. Horsemen of Apocalypse in the modern era. The modern era horsemen were the ones recruited by Apocalypse in the 20th and the 21st century. He first recruited Plague of the Morlocks. Plague was a mutant with the ability to spread disease and also magnify it. She was Morlock, a group of mutants who believed them to be outcasts and resided in the underground tunnels beneath New York, New Jersey, and Connecticut. During the massacre of the Morlocks by the modern murderers, she was present and had to face Sabretooth. Plague touched Sabretooth and he was weakened to such an extent that he would have died without his healing factors. However, Apocalypse arrived and rescued Plague and later made her one of his horsemen, Pestilence. Apocalypse then went on to recruit Abraham Lincoln Kairos for the title of the Horseman War. Abraham was a mutant whose ability was to create explosions by clapping his hands. He had numerous injuries in his wars, as a result of which he was paralyzed from the neck and forced to stay in an iron lung and could not even speak. Apocalypse arrived and restored his health. Following this, he was made the second horseman, War. Next, Apocalypse went to recruit his third horseman. It was about a young, spoiled, anorexic girl living with his parents named Autumn Rolfson. Her parents were not happy about her mutant abilities and despised her. One day, Apocalypse appeared in her room and promised her revenge on her parents along with those who hated her. Autumn agreed, following which she was taken in by Apocalypse to serve him as his third horseman, Famine. The fourth and the last horseman was a brainwashed Warren Worthington III, aka Angel. Apocalypse had assembled them to fight the X-Factor, who believed in making mutants and humans live in harmony. The story is showcased in X-Factor Volume 1, Issue number 24, published in January 1988. The story begins with the X-Factor finding themselves teleported to Apocalypse's ship. Soon, Apocalypse appeared before them and began explaining why the professor's ideas about peace and harmony amongst mutants and humans are a fallacy. He believed that only mutants should survive on the planet, as they are the superior species. Apocalypse offered them to join him in his cause, but the X-Factor rebuked it. Disappointed by their decision, he summoned his three horsemen, War, Pestilence, and Famine, to attack them. Soon a fight began between the X-Factor and the three horsemen. Cyclops and Marvel Girl took down War, while Iceman managed to defeat Famine. Beast Boy knocked out Pestilence. Apocalypse then summoned his fourth horseman, Death, and it was a former member of the X-Factor, Warren Worthington III. They tried convincing him not to believe in Apocalypse's vision, but he attacked and defeated them easily. X-Factor woke up restrained and unable to use their power. The four horsemen were then sent to spread fear in the city of Manhattan. Suddenly, one of the members of the X-Factor, Caliban, also chose to side with Apocalypse and requested him to amplify his strength like the horseman and let him serve him. Beast Boy managed to escape and free Iceman. Soon they were loose and attacked Apocalypse. The team split into two, with Beast Boy and Iceman fighting Apocalypse, while Jean and Cyclops rushed towards Manhattan to stop the four horsemen. They were aided by the team Power Pack. War, Death, and Famine were defeated, and they were teleported away in Apocalypse's invisible ship while Pestilence died in the fight. While Iceman and Beast Boy were fighting the three horsemen, Jean and Cyclops arrived using Pestilence's horse and joined the fight. In the fight, Death cuts Iceman in half, which triggers his memory. He soon removed Death's mask and began attacking Apocalypse. Iceman was completely fine, and the ice statue Death sliced was merely an ice double he made. Apocalypse then left with his horsemen except for War and Caliban in tow, and the day was once again saved. Caliban eventually became the horseman Death, and soon Apocalypse sought to recruit Hulk as his horseman War. In Incredible Hulk Volume 1, Issue number 456, Hulk was made into Apocalypse's War. He was a huge threat, but he, fortunately, got back to his senses when he thought his friend Rick Jones was injured by him. The 12 as Horsemen of Apocalypse. In the 12, which was a crossover storyline, the second incarnation of the Horseman was showcased. It was published within the first 2 months of 2020, and the issues were placed amidst many popular comic book series, while Caliban continued serving as a horseman and, this time as Pestilence, Apocalypse was on the hunt for his other three. He first went for Wolverine to recruit him as his horseman Death. Wolverine was abducted by Apocalypse and his place was replaced by a Skrull imposter. He was then made to fight Sabretooth for the Mantle of War. He defeated him and eventually became Death. Apocalypse then recruited Deathbird for his Horseman War. Shiro Yoshida was chosen to be Famine. In Uncanny X-Men issue number 375, when Wolverine was dead, his teammates realized that it, in fact, was a Skrull and not their teammate. Wolverine as Death served Apocalypse and fought several fights for him, and the X-Men finally learned that Wolverine was Death. As showcased in X-Men Volume 2, issue number 95, Cyclops, in order to save Polaris from abduction, took her place using an image inducer, and the X-Men followed him to the Skrull's lair. Soon a fight began, and Wolverine appeared as Death. He was there for a brief moment of time and soon escaped. In the next issue, Death was shown to be battling against his former teammates. Wolverine as Death fought ferociously, and it seemed that the X-Men never faced a deadlier foe than him. However, with the combined efforts of Psylocke, Archangel, Kitty Pryde, and Jubilee, Wolverine managed to snap out of Apocalypse's control. The issue also showcased Shiro Yoshida, aka Sunfire, serving Apocalypse. He too was freed by the X-Men. Deathbird and Famine were later teleported away by Mikhail Rasputin following the defeat of Apocalypse. In the series of few events, she was presumed dead. She was later shown to be rescued by the Imperial Guard, but not shown to be serving Apocalypse as War. Blood of Apocalypse. The next generation of Horsemen was introduced in the Blood of Apocalypse storyline, showcased within issues 182 to 187 of X-Men Volume 2. The story follows the House of M and the events of M-Day, which led to many mutants losing their powers. Apocalypse was resurrected using the techno-organic virus. He found out that the overall population of the mutants was reduced to 1/10, and Apocalypse planned to even it out by killing 90% of the humans. He soon began recruiting his 4 horsemen and first started with Gazer. Issue 182 begins with Gazer drifting in space. He was stationed at the NASA space station owing to his mutant abilities to withstand harmful radiation. However, when he lost his powers, like many other mutants, he succumbed to the radiation and was about to die. Giving up all hope, he wore his spacesuit and chose to die drifting into space. However, suddenly a bright light appeared, and in the next moment he was before Apocalypse. Gazer was pitted against an Egyptologist, stating that the victor of the two would be serving Apocalypse as his horseman, War. The scene then shifts to the World Health Organization laboratory in Washington, D.C., where Polaris, serving as Pestilence, was ingesting all the deadly viruses so as to release them on humankind. Meanwhile, Gazer struggled with the Egyptologist, and just before he is about to be killed, Ozymandias intervened and killed his opponent, thereby sparing his life and hailing him victorious. Next, the scene shifts to Shiro Yoshida, aka Sunfire, who had lost legs in the hands of Lady Deathstrike and his powers to Rogue. He was visited by Apocalypse, who brought him back on his feet and granted him powers to serve as his horseman, Famine. Gazer was transformed into the horseman, War. At last, Gambit was approached by Apocalypse to become the 4th horseman, Death. During the transformation process, he asked Apocalypse not to use any sedative on him so that the latter could not tamper with his mind. After becoming Death, Gambit still retained a part of himself and kept an eye on Apocalypse. In the final battle, Sunfire was able to break free from Apocalypse's control with the help of Emma Frost, while Polaris was knocked out by Iceman and later saved by Havoc. Gazer died fighting for Apocalypse, and Gambit was taken away by Sunfire and later made to break free from Apocalypse's control. The final horsemen of Apocalypse. The final horsemen of the 4th incarnation were a backup plan set by Apocalypse in case his plan failed. It consisted of Ichisumi as Pestilence, Decimus Furious as War, Jebli as Famine, and Sanja Javid as Death. They made their first appearance in Uncanny X-Force issue number 1, where Deadpool witnesses Clan Akaba, the bloodline of Apocalypse, sacrificing themselves to resurrect their eternal master, Apocalypse. He was soon ambushed by Decimus Furious, or War. Apocalypse was incarnated as a young boy, and the four horsemen were tasked to protect him, which they failed miserably. Apocalypse was eventually killed by Fantomex in Uncanny X-Force issue number 4. The confrontation between the X-Force and the Four Horsemen begins in issue number 2. They neutralize every member and wait for orders from the young Apocalypse to kill them. Young Apocalypse was reluctant to answer, and in that moment, Wolverine sprung up and attacked Death. Fantomex used his powers to misdirect Pestilence and War. At the same time, Psylocke managed to stab through the Minotaur's head. Fantomex misdirected their ship into believing they were invisible, which worked, and Psylocke went for the young Apocalypse. As the news reaches Ozymandias, Archangel kills him and, together with Psylocke, locates the child. Psylocke suggests that the infant could be trained not to be a tyrant, but Archangel defers and states that they should not take any chances and kill the baby. Archangel falls into confusion as well, but Fantomex arrives and shoots young Apocalypse dead. However, this was not the end of all troubles. It all began after Warren realizes the presence of his Archangel persona still existed within him. His relationship with Psylocke rekindled, and she eventually helped him maintain control over himself when Archangel took over. However, Warren later succumbed to his Archangel persona and later proved far deadlier than Apocalypse. Sanjay Javid was slain, and Psylocke replaced him as Death. Archangel impregnated Pestilence, and she gave birth to the Apocalypse twins. The kids were later taken away by Kang the Conqueror, which ultimately led to the demise of the Horsemen. Meanwhile, Archangel discovered the son of Apocalypse and a former Famine, Autumn Rolfson. His name was Genocide. Famine and War worked for Genocide, but a time-traveling Apocalypse twins arrived and killed War and Famine for choosing to work for Genocide instead of them, but spared their mother, Pestilence. Four Horsemen of Death. In Avenge the Earth storyline, showcased in the Uncanny Avengers issue 18-22, the Apocalypse twins created four horsemen. Their goal was to destroy Earth and teleport all mutants to Planet X, and they even succeeded. The story begins on a new planet known as Planet X, where Magneto and his all-new X-Force strictly prohibit the existence of humans. Wasp was the last human residing on the planet and was relentlessly hunted by the X-Force. Havoc tried saving her, but eventually failed after Magneto arrived and captured Wasp. Alex returned home to his daughter, following which Beast introduced Kang and the Kronos, who would be his last option to get back his wife Wasp. The Apocalypse twins then used a set of both Life Seeds and Death and brought Sentry, Banshee, Grim Reaper and Darken back to life to serve as the Four Horsemen. Unlike the Horsemen of Apocalypse, who took the title of his four children, these were Four Horsemen of Death. Apocalypse twins and their plans were foiled after the Avengers Unity Squad transferred their minds into their past selves and undone their victory. After Rogue was given sufficient power, she forced the Celestial away while the rest fought the Horsemen. By the end of the story arc, the Four Horsemen were defeated along with the Apocalypse twin. Banshee was taken captive by the Avengers. Sentry had disappeared into space, and Darken and Grim Reaper returned to Earth with the corpse of the Apocalypse twin. The newest incarnation of the Horsemen of Apocalypse. The newest incarnation of the Horsemen was showcased in the Apocalypse War story arc. Following the release of the Terrigen Mist, the mutants were severely affected. Storm, Iceman and Magic established a sanctuary called X-Haven in the Limbo to provide aid for the remaining mutants. After successfully rescuing Sunfire from Savage Land, Storm asked Colossus to train the mutants for battles. They even rescued Nightcrawler from being hunted by a mob in Germany and realized that his mind had gone unstable after the mutant genocide. Soon they discovered via Cerebro 600 mutant signatures in Tokyo, and Colossus, along with his trained new team, was tasked to find and rescue them. It was then revealed that Sugarman was experimenting on mutant genomes, who, upon noticing the X-Men, launched a self-destruct sequence. Colossus and his team tried to teleport it and protect the embryos in the future, but owing to a 1-minute delay, they landed in a future timeline called the Omega World. Omega World was a world filled with bubbles that preserved what remained of Earth after being invaded by Apocalypse. Apocalypse functioned as the world's heart, maintaining it alive, while his 4 horsemen functioned as antibodies, protecting their master. The new horsemen, as shown in the Omega World, were Deadpool, Man-Thing, Moon Knight, and Venom. Later, Colossus destroyed Man-Thing and replaced him with the Horsemen War. The team lost the mutant genomes in a confrontation with the Horsemen. They later tracked the Horsemen to Apocalypse's temple and soon began another fight. The Venom symbiote absorbed Wolverine while the rest of the team members fought the remaining 3 horsemen. Storm and Nightcrawler began searching for the genomes and confronted Apocalypse, who was a millennia old and used all his energy to keep the Beyond World from collapsing. As Apocalypse stated how he destroyed the Ark, Nightcrawler, in a fit of rage, stabbed Apocalypse, thus bringing the Omega World into collapse. Storm and Rest returned back to the X-Haven, and she also brought back Apocalypse in order to free Colossus from his Horseman War. However, Apocalypse used the last of his powers to teleport Colossus to Clan Akaba. Later, Colossus was retrieved in his horseman form, and after Nightcrawler made a deal with Apocalypse to free him from X-Haven, the latter reverted Colossal back to normal. Horsemen of Apocalypse from alternate universes. As there are an infinite number of parallel universes, it is mandatory to have Apocalypse and his horsemen from alternate realities. This one is from Earth TRN 756. In this reality, the Sentinels have taken over the world and the mutant kind was near to extinction. After spending 5 lifetimes trying to save them, Moira X decided to awaken Apocalypse and seek his help. With Apocalypse awakened, there were his horsemen. Showcased in Powers of X Volume 1, Issue number 1, we see the new set of horsemen. North became Pestilence. Zorn was given the title of Death. Cypher took the title of Famine, and Wolverine was the horseman known as War. Apocalypse, Famine, and War moved towards the main data repository to stop the creation of Nimrod, while Pestilence and Death attacked the Temple of Concordance. Pestilence and Death were surrounded by Omega Sentinels, and Pestilence was killed by a shot from one of the Sentinels. Death was gravely injured, and after Rasputin removed his mask and exposed the Singularity, everyone and everything in his vicinity was sucked into a black hole, destroying and killing Death in the process. While all this happened, Nimrod was brought online and was alerted of Famine, who had hacked into the Citadel and downloaded the information of when and how Nimrod came online in the crystal. Once he was about to leave, Nimrod appeared before him, but Apocalypse arrived to give him cover. In the battle between Apocalypse and Nimrod, the latter gained the upper hand and killed Apocalypse. Wolverine survived, and he returned with the information crystal and uploaded it to Moira's mind. He then killed her to reset the timeline where Moira would be reborn with the knowledge of how and when Nimrod originally came online and prevent it from ever happening. Another version of the Horseman that is known of is the Horseman of Salvation, created and led by Nate Gray. Unlike the Horsemen of Apocalypse, who were Death, War, Famine, and Pestilence, Nate's Horseman was that of Salvation. There was Magnetos as the Horseman of Peace, Warren Worthing III as the Horseman of Life, Blob as the Horseman of Bounty, and Omega Red as the Horseman of Wellness. At some point, Psylocke, after learning that Nate mind-controlled these horsemen, freed Warren, but later Nate brainwashed Storm into becoming his Horseman of Life. In an alternate reality known as the Age of Apocalypse, there existed the 4 horsemen, but without any specific titles. The first group of horsemen consisted of Death, Warkandra, and Gideon. Later, a new horseman was seen, known as Bastion, along with Maximus as the second Death. after Apocalypse announced a battle in which all of his horsemen would fight and the remaining 4 would rule North America along with Apocalypse. The victors were Holocaust, Mikhail Rasputin, Bastion, and Mr. Sinister. After the fall of Apocalypse, Weapon X became his heir. A new set of horsemen were selected and were named ministers. They were Azazel as the Minister of Death, the Resurrected Emplate as the Minister of Pestilence, and the Summers Brothers, Scott and Alex, and Ministers of Famine and War. In another alternate reality made by Apocalypse, Davan Shakari was known as the Horseman of Death. In the Anima of the State Story arc, Cable became one of his horsemen. In order to find a missing Cable, Deadpool was forced to travel into alternate universes. In the first universe, Deadpool found a new set of 4 horsemen. There was an 8-armed Spider-Man as Pestilence, Blob as Famine, Archangel as Death, and a superpowered Cable as War. At some point, one of the original members of the Exiles, Thunderbird, was transformed into one of Apocalypse's horsemen, War. After being transformed, Thunderbird lost his humanity and sense of taste, but also grew extremely powerful. He could even overpower the Hulk. When Scarlet Witch altered reality and created the House of M, Apocalypse was brought back to life. He then went to Wakanda along with 3 of his horsemen, Iceman, Angel, and Nightcrawler. The list of different iterations is not over without the Marvel Mangaverse, where Apocalypse was a tokusatsu-esque villain. His horsemen included Archangel, Juggernaut, Mr. Sinister, and the White Queen. In an alternate age of Apocalypse reality, Spider-Man, Wolverine, Scarlet Witch, and Red Hulk were 4 of Apocalypse's horsemen. In the What If series, one of the realities showed Wolverine as the horseman of war. He eventually turned against Apocalypse and killed him. He then began slaughtering Earth villains and criminals before becoming the peaceful Brother Xavier. In another What If reality, where Legion had killed Xavier, Storm, Juggernaut, Namor, and Hulk were showcased as the 4 horsemen. In X-Men 92, Baron Robert Kelly, Bastion, Exodus, and Mystique are revealed as Apocalypse's current horsemen. Horsemen of Apocalypse in other media. Apocalypse and his horsemen were also showcased in animated films and live-action movies. Although the stories were similar to the comics, they had minute deviations. X-Men Evolution. In the animated TV show titled X-Men Evolution, the Horsemen were introduced in episode 10, titled Come the Apocalypse. Mystique was shown to be brainwashing Angel and 3 other mutants under Apocalypse's orders to become his 4 horsemen. When the horsemen battled the X-Men, Rogue confronted Angel and absorbed his evil brainwashing, thereby reverting him back to normal. The rest of the 3 horsemen escaped. Later, episode 65, titled The Lazarus Chamber, showcased a new set of horsemen led by Death. In the episode, the X-Men traveled to the past in order to destroy the Lazarus Chamber of Apocalypse. Once they arrived, the 4 horsemen were wearing Egyptian garbs guarding it. Later in episode 71, titled The Fifth Horseman, Fabian Cortez was forced by Apocalypse to become the 5th horseman. After his master's apparent death, Fabian tried resurrecting him in Caliban's body. Later, when he failed, Apocalypse recreated himself in the body of Fabian Cortez.
And my greatest creation.
X-Men the Animated Series. The X-Men the Animated Series showcased an alternate reality of Earth 92131, and like all the other characters, the reality had its Apocalypse and the 4 Horsemen. They were introduced in the 10th episode of the final season. The lineup consisted of the mutants who submitted themselves to the so-called mutant cure developed by Mystique in disguise as Dr. Adler. The curse was, in fact, a process of transforming the mutants into Apocalypse's horsemen. It transformed 4 mutants: Autumn Rolfson as Famine, Plague as Pestilence, Abraham Lincoln Kairos as War, and Archangel as Death. Soon the newly transformed horsemen began spreading their wrath around the world, and causing a rampage. Famine attacked the farms and destroyed the crops, while war attacked the different military bases. Death destroyed a dam which caused the death of several innocents. When the X-Men arrived, they found Pestilence spreading sickness and disease. While Storm and Cyclops fought her and took her down, the rest of the Horsemen arrived. Famine fought Cyclops and Storm, while War's attacks severely injured Wolverine. Meanwhile, Rogue foolishly came face to face with Apocalypse. The Horsemen retreated back to their base, where a disappointed Apocalypse could be seen toying with Rogue and nearly killing her with his powerful energy blasts. Soon the X-Men arrived and the second battle round began between them and the Horsemen. Jean Grey easily neutralized Pestilence, while Cyclops knocked War with his energy beams. Storm and her powerful lightning bolts dealt Famine. Just as Death was about to make an attack, Rogue touched him and she absorbed all his powers along with the memories. This reverted Archangel back to his normal self, and in rage at what he had become, he attacked and defeated the other Horsemen. X-Men Apocalypse. Moving on to the live-action version, 2016's X-Men Apocalypse showcased En-Sabah Nur and his 4 Horsemen. The story begins with an aged En-Sabah Nur in 3600 BC, who is about to undergo the transformation process. He was about to be transferred into a young mutant's body with regenerative power before his followers betrayed him and destroyed the pyramid where the transfer took place. While the pyramid collapsed, the 4 Horsemen remained with their master and died protecting him. En-Sabah Nur was trapped under the rubble in a comatose state. En-Sabah Nur was later awakened in 1983 and he began exploring the modern-day world. He noticed Aurora Monroe stealing and realized she was a mutant. When the man from whom she stole got hold of her and threatened her, En-Sabah Nur arrived and killed the men by melting them through the adjacent walls. He then visited Aurora's house and used her television to learn about the modern-day world. He was disgusted about how the mutants lived subdued, and the only thing he liked was a clip of Magneto making his statement to the world as showcased in the Days of Future Past. Apocalypse decided he needed to step in to show the world the place of the mutants and started by recruiting his 4 Horsemen. He first chose Storm and amplified her powers to an enormous extent, making her his first Horseman, Famine. En-Sabah Nur then went on to recruit his next Horseman, Psylocke, who was then an American worker at the Iron Curtains for a mutant broker. He enhanced her power and chose her for being the Horseman Pestilence. In an underground fight club, Nightcrawler and Angel were made to fight each other in an electrocuted cage fight. Raven Darkholme, aka Mystique, had arrived to save the mutants, and after the fight was over with Nightcrawler, she managed to free Nightcrawler and rescue him. Later, En-Sabah Nur arrived and chose Angel to be his Horseman of Death. He replaced Angel's organic wings with metallic ones and renamed him Archangel. Eric Lencier then had discarded his role as Magneto and lived happily with his wife and children in Poland. His happy life was short-lived, as one day, while working in a steel factory, he used his powers to save a co-worker from a falling pillar. He was spotted by others and reported to the authorities. Soon, Eric's family was surrounded by Polish officers. As Eric tried reasoning out and surrendered himself, his daughter Nina, in shock, released her mutant abilities. It caused a flock of birds to attack the officers, and one of them, in shock, released an arrow that killed both Nina and her mother. This caused Eric to snap out in rage, and he used the locket he gave to Nina and killed each and every Polish officer. Back at the factory, Eric arrived and revealed his true self, Magneto, and stated that he was about to kill them. Just as the metal objects began shimmering, Apocalypse arrived and interrupted him. In a second, he made every member of the factory sink through the floor with their body parts sticking out. He then took Eric to the ruins of Auschwitz concentration camp, where he agreed to join the force of Apocalypse, thus becoming his fourth horseman, War. Apocalypse amplified Magneto's power to such an extent that he could manipulate every speck of magnetic material from the ground with ease. Apocalypse's next target was Professor Charles Xavier for his telepathic powers. Apocalypse intended to transfer his consciousness and powers to the body of Charles Xavier, which would make him invincible. He captured Charles Xavier, but the X-Men arrived with new recruits to save their professor. In the final confrontation between X-Men and Apocalypse, along with the Horsemen, the former struggled to match them. Storm was a follower of Mystique, and upon seeing her fight alongside her team against Apocalypse, she gave up and switched sides. Even Magneto switched and attacked Apocalypse along with the rest of the X-Men. Psylocke realized that they were defeated and hence escaped from the scene. Marvelous verdict. So we have finally come to the end of our video, and we hope you have liked our content. The concept of the Horsemen somehow boosts up the threat of their master Apocalypse. They are chosen by Apocalypse, and it's interesting to observe the transition from their former self to Horseman. Their powers are augmented, and it was best shown for Magneto. It was a breathtaking scene with gigantic magnetic lines of forces made up of every magnetic material from the Earth. It should also be noted that in many iterations, the fall of Apocalypse was often because some of his horsemen betrayed him. Please feel free to write in the comments about your favorite horseman or the best incarnation.